Introduce Lana Marks Pulver, Board Chair of the Jewish Federation, who will get us started with some introductory remarks.
Thanks, Gabe. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. As Gabe said, I'm Lana Marks Pulver, Chair of Jewish Federation of Greater Vancouver. Israel has always been in our hearts, and since October 7th, our love and support have taken on a new sense of urgency. Israelis are going through so much right now. Hundreds of thousands have been displaced. Kiryat Shmona, our partnership region, is still evacuated and feels like a ghost town. Many of us on this Zoom have contributed to Federation's Israel Emergency Campaign, and I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of you. We have raised over $19 million, and we have already transferred $6.5 million to Israel, which has been directed to immediate and midterm needs, and we've got every intention of being there for the long term. Many of us are committed to being there in the literal sense too, by going to Israel. We feel that pull from deep inside ourselves because Israel is a part of us, and it always will be. Our CEO, Ezra, participated on a mission with the leaders of other Canadian Jewish federations and 5 members of parliament. And just a few days ago, the rabbis from across our community went on a mission of their own. And I want to give accolades to our rabbis for taking the initiative and raising the money to do so. Joining us to tell us about their experience are Rabbi Moskowitz, Rabbi Rosenblatt, Rabbi Gibbs, Rabbi Infeld, Rabbi Brown, Rabbi Dresner, Rabbi Tendler, and Rabbi Bregman, as well as not Rabbi Ezra Shankin. We'll start with Rabbi Dan for an overview of the mission and then take questions moderated by Ezra. If you want to submit a question, please use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. Over to you, Rabbi Dan.
Thank you, Lana, and thank you everyone for joining us. I understand there's about 400 households on this Zoom call, and that's just tremendous. We wish Rabbi Rosenblatt was with us, or actually I should say we wish we were with Rabbi Rosenblatt, who's still in Israel, and I think maybe now heading to New York for some work for his congregation, but the rest of us are here. Although I should say we're here, but we're also still there. This trip really came together because of all of you. Because so many of you over the last couple of months have been sharing with us and with our whole community the centeredness of Israel in your life right now and in your thoughts. It's occupied all of our thoughts and so much of our work. And we were urged both internally and externally to go and bear sacred witness. And so that's what we did. We didn't come empty-handed, as you know. We brought with us 21 duffel bags filled with gear, most of it warm weather gear. For largely reservists in the IDF who head off into their units, into their posts without having some of those basic kinds of things. Obviously, the IDF provides the military equipment, but the warm socks and hats and underwear and gloves and those kinds of things, if you don't bring it from home and you're on station, you can't leave and get it. So we brought that with us from you, and gift cards or note cards, as well as some special goggles that Rabbi Bregman had arranged, and 3 Mahjong sets. While we were there, I will just say that we bared sacred witness through our eyes and our ears and our presence. We met with scholars, Yossi Klein Halevi, Michal Mushkat Barkant, who helped give us a frame on the first evening. On the second day, after meeting at the Israeli Foreign Ministry with experts on Israel and on the surrounding region and Israel diaspora relations, we headed south to Kibbutz Bari, and on our way down there, as you'll probably hear, we spent some time in a truck stop where we handed out and bought lunch for a number of soldiers who were there. We saw and bore witness to the after effects of the Nova Music Festival in piles of cars that had been bullet-ridden and had been burned that were being taken care of by Zakah. So that the cars themselves, after drained of fuel and fluids, could be buried because they contained remnants of human remains. We went to Ben Mizrahi's grave. We placed a stone. We said a psalm. We heard from his family. Each of us individually met with friends and family members who were connected in Israel, and all of them are connected to people that were directly affected by the events of October 7th and since. We saw and spent time with the displaced people in Israel from the north and the south. They were in our hotels. I'm sure you'll hear more about that in just a moment. In the evening, on our last evening, we held a Hanukkah party for members actually of our partner region. That wasn't initially part of the plan, although it couldn't have worked out better, from those from Kiryat Shmona, in a hotel where we provided music and donuts and gifts and wine and just some light and life in the midst of a very dark time. In between all of that, we got to see Israel in action, visiting Achim Leneshek, one of the volunteer organizations that is gathering together Israeli civil society to provide the supports that are so needed. Again, we saw an exhibit of the Nova Music Festival that was heartrending, and you'll hear probably a bit about that this evening. And through it all, and I'll just conclude with this, we were together. And I just want to say what a remarkable group I feel so privileged to be a part of. These rabbis in this community. We were together before we left for Israel, as we often try whenever we can to collaborate and work together. And we were together throughout this trip and came back even stronger as Israel is coming through this, no doubt battered, no doubt wounded, but also strong. There were more bits and pieces in all of that. We spoke and spent time with the Israeli Arabs to hear of their experience also, but I will leave it there at a very high level. And just to say that every person on this call and Rabbi Rosenblatt played a part in planning and pulling this trip together. And the hands of your rabbis helped to build this and hold us together and hold our community together.
I want to thank you, Rabbi Moskowitz, and all of our rabbis for the showing the leadership in going. I know when I went just a couple weeks before, I thought I understood what I was going to see. I thought I understood what it was going to be like, but it wasn't. I could not have imagined what it was like until I actually went through it. I'd love to understand from the other rabbis kind of what was your initial thought kind of going over there, and then how did this change kind of when you were there? What were the surprises that you saw when you were there, and that now that you're back, that you're starting to realize? It took me a long time to kind of, I'm still processing my own trip. So, you know, I know that that's probably happening for you guys. And please feel free to jump in.
I could jump in. I think I was surprised by the high level of like can-do resourcefulness that Israel has popped back to. It's felt to me over the last couple of years that Israelis have been kind of depressed, maybe through the last administration, but they are full force and embracing their ingenuity and turning the energy of their resistance movement into this amazing volunteer corps to supply really whatever is needed to whatever sector, and able to just kind of shift so agilely from first supplying to soldiers who needed their basic needs, to supplying the needs of families in furnished temporary residences, to now creating customized pallets of household goods, from tricycles to the right board games and bedding and washing machines for families that are finally moving into more impermanent residences. I'll leave that there, but I was amazed by the energy.
I was told by my son-in-law, who's Israeli, he said, "This is an Israel you've never seen before unless you've been there during wartime." And through Rav, we had the opportunity of meeting with a psychiatrist with the Canadian Armed Services to help us prepare perhaps for the trauma. It's one thing to have that as an intellectual understanding. It's another thing when you're actually there to witness the absolute pain and trauma. People have asked me, how was the trip? I said it was brutal. To be received by Israelis the way we were received. I've been to Israel dozens of times. People are happy to see us. Nothing like this, where we handed out cards. And in particular, Dan talked about the truck stop that we were at. I saw soldiers taking these cards and then dropping down to the sidewalk and crying, and taking the cards and holding them to their chest, as if this was a sacred piece of text, and just saying thank you, to know that we are not forgotten.
Anyone else want to add their insights?
We
I
were,
Go
I
ahead.
thought we were very lucky, actually. We stayed at the Dan Panorama in Tel Aviv, which had, I think, 8 paying customers. That was us, and 1,100 internal refugees and people who've been driven from their homes in the south and in the north. And I was obvious, the sadness of not being in one's home for a day or for 2 days, weeks, months now on end is incredibly painful. But I was personally struck by the manifest community that had already begun to develop amongst the people who are living in the hotel together. I mean, imagine having to live for months on end outside of your home in a hotel room, far from where you actually live. Often many people coming from a more rural area, and now living in the heart of Tel Aviv. That's got to be extremely difficult. But community, I saw kids roughhousing on the elevator, just trying to be there for each other and really supporting one another was absolutely beautiful. And I was grateful that we ended up at that particular hotel.
Yeah,
I had the same feeling about the hotel too. And one of the other things that really struck me, definitely when we first arrived, and I've been thinking about it a lot ever since, is the way in which the kind of symbolism and the phrases of Yachad Ninatzeach, together we will, overcome, and bring them home, like how they're everywhere. They're on the bridges, they're on the buildings, they're on people's necks. I see Rabbi Bregman's wearing his dog tags. Bring them home. It's so all encompassing of the society right now. And some of it's very heavy in that way, but it's also very uniting. And the sense of kind of everyone is in this together. We saw a lot of moments of groups of Israelis together that maybe wouldn't have kind of gathered in one gathering before. I'm thinking in particular, we went our second night to Kikar Chatufim, which is the hostage square in Tel Aviv, where they held a menorah lighting. And just the range of people that were gathered together and being honored together as part of the society. Even the artist, Lior Narkis, who kind of sang some songs at the beginning, he's a big deal. And he was kind of just there as a part of Israeli society, giving his own contribution to that moment. And that was really beautiful.
I want to add, Rabbi Tendler, let me add this other piece to it, and you'll answer and hopefully add this piece to it also. So I'd love for everybody to understand kind of what, not only kind of the initial question of what you were surprised with, but then what you discovered there that really spoke to you around bringing back value to your different congregations, and which pieces did you kind of experience and say, wow, that's not just for me, but this is for my whole congregation. I need to bring that back. I need to remember that. So Rabbi Tendler, I'll let you continue.
Sure, thanks. So to follow up on what everyone said, and to give a bit of perspective, because it's what's not being talked about so much at the moment, is, we were also supposed to stay at the Dan Panorama, in Yerushalayim, but it turned out that evacuees had come and the hotel was full. And of course, we're like, of course, right? But we couldn't have experientially understood that until we got to Tel Aviv. And I just said this at the rally, but my girlfriend had gone a week before, 2 weeks before, and she said she never saw anybody smile the whole time she was there. And as Rabbi Bregman said, the ability for us to bring smiles by simple cards that our students from across the community and our community members sent with us. I remember at that same truck stop, just it's a piece of paper, it's colorful, and Rabbi Brown and Rabbi Dresner had already done something. They're like, go. And the way that people would light up and say, Bemet, like really people from Canada are thinking about us. And what it really brought to me, and I felt over and over and over in our trip, is that so often we feel spread out and we feel like, what can we do from this side of the world? But together, thank you, Rabbi Moskowitz, we're such a small people. And that sense of connectedness that Rabbi Brown talked about in all of the banners extends to the fact that we talk about being a global community, but personally, I think we all really felt the impact of that and how our being there and bringing duffel bags. I mean, when we donated them, people were like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. It's just amazing. To cards, to mail that's not getting there, to our lone soldiers, to glasses, to like, it didn't, whatever it was that we were bringing, and mostly like us being here or the thoughts from our community who sent us was that's amazing. And as Rabbi Infeld talked about, that hotel, the moment we walked into the Dan Panorama in Tel Aviv, it's something that until we walked in, smelled, heard, felt, we could not have anticipated before, of evacuees from the north and evacuees of the south all meeting together there and knowing instantaneously that whether they were from the north or the south, two different experiences that brought them, a different thing that brought us, we all came together in one place. And I would say that for me in particular, that was underscored by our first night meeting somebody who I knew from the camp where my children often go, to being at Kibbutz Be'eri with a kibbutz member who took us around to saying to a whole group of Western Canadian rabbis, hey, you know what? I once went to this camp in Georgia. I'm like, wait, I go to that camp. I work at that camp. I was married at that camp. That this idea that we are spread out, but at the heart of it all, we honestly really are one very small, connected people. We are one family, one community, and that was the most amazing thing of all.
That's fabulous. And I love to kind of intermix also the piece of, something unique about this trip was that, like our amazing Rav, which when I talk about our Rav, when I am meeting with leaders all around the country and around the world, they say, wait a second, you have all the streams? And I say, yeah. And they're like, that's amazing. And I'm like, yeah, that is amazing. And it makes our community better for it. You decided to go all together. And that is, there are plenty of rabbis who have gone on their own and plenty of some of the movements that have gone. But the idea of actually the diversity of rabbis inhabiting one community to go together is very unique. This is actually the first in Canada for this to happen. And so I'd love to ask kind of, in addition to what you're bringing back, kind of how did that add to the dimension here? How did that experience, did you feel that? Did that make it feel more than even what it originally was?
Rabbi Dan, did you want to say something? And then I can.
Sure, I was going to comment on something that Rabbi Tendler had said, but
and then I'll speak to Ezra's question then.
Yep,
sure.
Go ahead, Rabbi Dan.
I can do both. If any, we all on this call should be able to, at least give a draw to two topics at the same time. I was just going to, building on what Rabbi Tendler said and the original question, one of the things for me that I want to take back to our community is that, we've all been to Israel many times, and when you go to Israel often, they thank you for coming. And, in times of peace, they thank you for coming in large part because of the economic contribution that you and your group make to the hospitality industry and just filling the country. And that's all wonderful. This was different. This was a sense of thanking us for coming because we showed up. Because we were just there. And for me, the frame was often about the country being in Shiva and showing up at a Shiva house. And it wasn't even about the socks and the toques and the gloves, although those were important, but just our presence, that Israelis, for some reason, and obviously we know the reasons, think that maybe the world has forgotten them or is not thinking about them. There has been a disconnect with the diaspora, up until October 6th, let's say, for many. And that we showed up, that we cared to do this, that we spent 20 hours on an airplane to be on the ground for 60 hours to fly back for another 20 hours. That blew people away. And so just the showing up part, and if I would say one thing that could be a lesson for all of us here back in our community, and it builds on Ezra's question, is that's a Jewish value that exists not only in going to Israel, but in our community also. I'm going to a Shiva after this to lead a Shiva, and I know that there will be members from, every congregation that's represented here at that Shiva. And that's what we do in this community. And that is what is so special. Our places and spaces have doors, but the doors are open and the thresholds are not high. And we're in each other's places as often as possible. And I'll turn it to Rabbi Infeld in just a moment, but just to say that it was great being together with, our relative diversity of practice and views. We're really not all that different, but we each, as I said at the beginning, we each brought our own friendships, our own connections, I wouldn't say our agendas, but our own priorities. And that just added to the, to the beauty and the richness and the color of the trip. And the little accommodations that, that we made, it may not have been so important for one to do something, but very important for another. And so we made sure to do that. And I think that our goal throughout the mission was for all of us to feel like we were at home, if you can think of it, a group of 8 rabbis, and for all of us to feel like we were in charge. And very much we were collectively.
I want to add one. You weren't there. There have been other community members who've been there. I know. I believe Jonathan Leipzig's on right now. I know he went around right at the same time that you guys went. And and we're always inviting, and we'd love to hear from people, put in kind of what your personal experiences are. I'd like to touch on a couple of questions that we're receiving and from people. One of the questions is, beyond doing what you guys did, what can community do collectively and individually to make Israelis feel seen and heard, make them feel like they're not alone in this moment? And I want to make sure we hear from, all our rabbis. I know Rabbi Gibbs, I haven't heard from you yet. I want to make sure that I hear from you on different things. This may not be it, but just make sure I know I see you there. And I want to make sure that I give some time there. But what can we do back here to help Israelis feel seen and heard in this moment?
I just want to touch on the question you asked before, and then
Sure.
About that question. So this actually I think was not just the first of this type of trip in Canada, but maybe in all of North America. I don't know of any other type of cross-community trip of rabbis like this. And the fact that we have already an established Rav is what sort of enabled it. And as the current chair of Rabbi, I suggested it, and as a good chair does, I then delegated. And I want to thank Rabbi Dan for having been able to get the funding from outside our community to make it happen, and to Rabbi Tendler and Brown for having worked very hard to put it together. And as well, the truth is that WestJet actually canceled our flight 20 minutes before we were about to leave. And Neil Chark amazingly somehow pulled a miracle. It was the Hanukkah miracle of Vancouver and got us there.
It's
So
5 o'clock in the morning.
5 o'clock in the morning. And you're right, Jonathan Leipzig was there as accompanying his rabbi, and also as we had our own doctor going with us just in case something happened. So he was on the flights back and forth. And it was really because of the hard work of all of these people that we were able to pull it off. So anyway, thank you, Ezra.
So how can we support have Israelis feel the support right now? What can we be doing?
We can be at the rallies. I mean, there was a phenomenal rally. Rabbi Tendler today gave a brilliant summary, and then we heard from a psychologist. We heard from Israelis at the rally today. It's important to be there on Sunday afternoon, filtering through a huge number of Israelis in our community, and they need to know that they're not standing alone. It's one of the things.
I would say likewise, we met with some families in the hotel where we had the Hanukkah party, and I was talking with a woman in particular who was sharing about how her 2 sons are in Gaza fighting for the IDF. And I told her that we do the prayer for Tzahal, for the IDF, in our services at the shul. And she was so surprised and touched, and then said, keep praying. So, on the one hand, one is just prayer, which, all of us have different connections to prayer, but also gathering together in prayer. I think there's something very, very powerful, certainly to let Israelis know that we're doing that and thinking of them in that way, but also for us to gain strength from one another in community by gathering together. And Shabbat is probably the best way to do that, that then we take that energy out into the world. Actually, I think really does something.
I would like to follow up even on what Rabbi Moskowitz said, which is about showing up, right? It's what you both also just said, right? Showing up. And so there's a number of different opportunities in Israel forming to go and to volunteer. And honestly, I would really love to see missions leave from Vancouver, now of our lay community starting to form, to go on volunteer missions together and to keep the trail, keep going, and to help be now and even after the war, to help rebuild and to show up in our local places and there. It's all a stream.
I just want to make sure that before we kind of move forward, because I realized I hadn't asked about this. Both myself and your delegation had a really powerful and unique opportunity to see the aftermath of the October 7th massacre. I walked Kfar Aza with a dean who is a member of our board and now finishing up serving as an officer over these past number of months, and members of our leadership delegation, and very searing images. I think I would love for people to kind of hear just a little bit about that moment and what that was like. Rabbi Dresner?
I do have a community member who has a family member who was taken hostage from Be'eri. So that was a very powerful experience for me. But I want to go back and reiterate what Rabbi Dan mentioned, one of the things Rabbi Dan mentioned in his overview, which I found to be one of the, maybe the most powerful experience of the atrocities for me. And that was this, what seemed like big junkyard of cars that we saw on the side of the road, and were asked to get out to look at closer and learn that these were the cars that had been lining the road, filled with folks from the Nova Music Festival trying to escape. And those cars were shot up and burst into flames. And here they were at a kind of a Chevra Kadisha of their own. I'm talking about this being one big Shiva visit. I was just so amazed by the kavod that was being given, that each of these vehicles was now being siphoned of any remaining flammable material so that each one of them could be buried, kedat v'kedin, like according to our halacha, so that none of the human remains would be just discarded as junk. And I found that overwhelmingly powerful and wanted to bring that forward a little bit more.
Rabbi Gibbs? Oh, there's the junkyard. And I was there too. Very powerful. Very, very powerful. Unbelievable.
But not a junkyard.
Yeah, not a junkyard. Really not. Rabbi Gibbs, would you like to give some insight on the visits for some of the sacred sites?
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful things that I noticed was how it was able to give a deeper sense of purpose. We talked to someone, who mentioned that sort of with the right intervention, that you're able to mitigate, some of the long-term effects of trauma. And, at least I was really struck by, Latan, our tour guide in Be'eri, of how he really was able to give this tour and really talk about and really relive what I can only imagine. I mean, not imagine, that must have been the worst moments of his life, as he was having to, here he's standing in front of his in-laws' house, where he had to listen to them being taken away by terrorists, but being able to share that story with such clarity and to be able to do it with such a purpose as well as the hope of rebuilding, that it really was that sense of resilience. And that, in some of the, I guess, small experiences, I had during our free time, that I think it really emphasized how, just as it is important to have the connection, in some ways, the public support through rallies, through, media, that it also just showed the importance and beauty of what it was to find community. Like I happened to be walking by like an open door in a Beth Tzedek in Tel Aviv, where a couple was about to light Hanukkah candles, and and seeing me walk by, they're like, no, come in and join. And then sort of went through both, lighting the candles and going through kind of like their favorite songs, some of which I know, some of which I don't, because they're very specific Israeli melodies. It shows that there is always that cultural gap. But it really was, I think, that desire of having that person-to-person connection, and that really it's through those personal relationships and having that sense of support. And it's something that really is about, that ongoing sense of relationship that's able to be a source of strength.
I think that just to add on to what Rabbi Gibbs said, it's the personal stories that make the biggest difference. I think, we've all seen the pictures and the videos, and we've been inundated with them. But standing there with Lotan, hearing about his in-laws and seeing the items that his children played with at their house scattered on the ground was truly piercing. And I think, as something, and I think I saw someone write something about this in the Q&A, to be able to bring back those stories, we can do it secondhand, but also for opportunities for us, whether it's by Zoom or, people visiting Israel, or even, have opportunities for Israelis to come to Vancouver. Yeah. Those really make a big difference in trying to be able to understand what is such a overwhelming catastrophe that happened.
I'd like to share, if I might, what were the most traumatic experiences for me personally. One was at the kibbutz, where I was told by one of the guides that the IDF had found the Hamas playbook on the ground as to what should happen. And as he described it, to me, it sounded as if it could have been written by Eichmann or Hitler. It was not only to destroy the body, but to destroy the mind, the soul, the psychology, the emotional, spiritual aspect of every Jew. Of how the kibbutzniks would be hiding in their safe room, and if Hamas could not get in, which they could, they would light the house on fire and then wait for individuals to come out either through the window or the door. But when they came out, they would take a look at what the family would look like. And they had a script. Kill the parents in front of the children, and then kill some of the children in front of their siblings, and then take others as hostage. That destroyed me.
And
the other, if I just might, at the Nova Museum. Here I know I was in December of 2023, but I thought I was back in Auschwitz, or I thought I was back in Yad Vashem when we saw the cases of shoes and glasses. And it was an active museum because every once in a while, someone would come by, we were told, and say, "Those are my shoes. May I have them?" If you go to Auschwitz, if you go to Yad Vashem, you see the cases. Here we were not in the 1930s and 40s. Here we were in December of 2023.
Powerful. A question that was in the chat, which I thought was apropos. Many of us, being here, we're talking to our friends who are not from the Jewish community. Some of them are even on right now watching. What would we say to them coming out of this experience? What would we want them to know when they're being inundated by certain news, and maybe not always positive around Israel, no doubt. I mean, that's natural to the situation, unfortunately. But what would we want them to know from this firsthand experience? Not diminishing other ideas, but better clarifying where we are and what we've seen.
I think it's important for all of our community and non-Jews to understand that as a Jewish community, we are all nogea b'davar. We are all touching this matter. And I had an experience when we were in the Dan Panorama at the hotel. We had a meeting in a side room off the lounge, and then we were walking out, and it turned out that they turned the lounge of the Dan Panorama into a room for one particular family from Kfar Aza. And that was the family that had exactly happened to them what Rabbi Bregman just described. The one child and the father of this family was killed. There were the grandparents, and then two of the children and the mother, who had been taken hostage and had been freed about a month ago, when a number of hostages were released. And as we were walking out of just coming from a meeting, one of the grandparents said, "I overheard that you're a group of rabbis from Vancouver," said this to me. And I said, "Yes, that's right." And she said, "Oh, do you know such and such a family?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, yes, my family just married into their family." And then we realized, she explained who they were, and was very quickly realized that when they say that we as a Jewish people are really one family, we really are. And we are all just one, we're just one step away from everyone that happened on October 7th and everything that's happening today. When I was meeting with another member of my family on the first night, he told me that his grandson's six best friends were killed in Gaza that day. And so I think it's really important for the non-Jewish community to understand how nogea b'davar, just how touching, no matter how close we are to everything that is happening in Israel.
And
Yeah, I would say that it's such an important lens that we need to bring to everything that we do there, here, in all of our interactions, is that of empathy, and to really put ourselves in the shoes of those that are over there, Jewish or non-Jewish, to see that how would we have responded any differently? Both in terms of our trauma and the pain, and also Israel's necessary response. And you can argue over whether the military should do it this way or that way, more or less or whatever. But yes, it is probably quite true that Israel was attacked because it is there, and it is a country filled with Jews. But what we learned about the barbarity of October 7th was that this was really an attack on civilization. This was really an attack on all the things that we value in terms of life and love and humanity. And so for the non-Jews that are on this call, first, I thank you for being here. Again, just
Right.
showing up and your support. But to help translate that to your non-Jewish friends as well, maybe as Jews with thousands of years of history of this, we get it. But I don't think the rest of the world does. And I don't think I'm stepping too far out of into politics to say that this is not isolated to Israel in this moment, that it is only over there because it's there now. And that the danger that's represented by this kind of barbarity and inhumanity, were it, God forbid, to come to our borders, to Canada, or something like this to happen in Abbotsford, or on one of the islands or something like that, how would you want Canada to respond, and how would you want the world to respond to Canada, to bring that lens and that message of empathy, and to really look at this as not an isolated thing over there, but as something that impacts all of us everywhere.
Rabbi Tendler.
So when Rabbi Infeld says we're all nogea b'davar, that we're all touched by the matter, it's to say that whether you know someone who was killed that day, whether you know somebody whose home was infiltrated, whether you know families personally who were taken hostage or not, it has affected every nook and cranny of Israeli society. And that was one of the things that became so evident, as well as how interconnected. So in that same interaction in which Rabbi Infeld realized that they were family, Rabbi Brown and I had been on a phone call a month ago, maybe, with our tour operator, who we were really blessed to have both a tour guide and a tour operator. So it was actually the tour guide's brother who found that playbook, that Hamas playbook, and the tour operator. And when we came and said, well, these are the things we want to do, he had said to us early on, look, it's not about what you want to do. And and he said it in a way of what you've already heard. The Israel you knew, even if you were there October 6th, is not the same Israel after October 7th. It is drastically different. I've lived through wars. This is drastically different. And he went on to share about his neighbor who lives behind him, who had family who was killed and family who was taken to Gaza. And he walked out, and it was his neighbor who lives right behind him, who's also like the sister of the grandfather that we were talking to. And it again was just like, oh, that's the person. Oh, and when we were in Beery with him, it's just a kibbutznik and someone who again lives far from the south, but it's not far, right? He became overwhelmed with emotion, and seeing it through that lens just really amplified the fact that all of Israel, every single person is affected in so many ways, in their lack of security. And I mean, they have good security, but right. Or one of the things I learned that we don't talk about is that after civilians were killed on October 7th, Hamas put live grenades underneath their bodies so that when they would be lifted to be cared for, that's what would explode. Or even in the house that Rabbi Moskowitz put the picture up of with Lotan and his in-laws' house, it wasn't that the house came down on October 7th. It was a live grenade that happened days later. And so when we go back to that idea of humanity, and what we would want the world to know is that when people make statements of standing with the Palestinians, I think that everybody on this call has empathy and cares about the suffering of human lives, right? That's not the question we're talking about. We all want to make sure that human civilians are spared, but we also want to ask that if you, like, what is the message you're really sending? And look at the bigger context, and to be mindful of when the calls are made or the silence is kept. Like, what is the message you're really sending?
I want to ask one other question. I think many of us, it's hard for me to remember before October 7th these days. It's hard for me to remember. But if we could remember what those times were like, especially in the state of Israel, these were challenging times for us. And much was going on, and much strain was happening. Many of us were, trying to figure out how to appropriately engage in that moment, and what that would look like. I'm curious, when you were on the ground, because one of the things that I experienced the night that this happened was, how could this happen? I remember messaging our people in Israel, our staff in Israel, just flabbergasted. How could this how could this be happening? How could this be happening? How could it be of this degree? How could we have not seen this? And there is no doubt a reckoning that will have to happen in Israel as we, God willing, exit successfully out of this moment and move to the next moment. Did you feel that starting to build while you were there? Did people want to talk about that with you? Or was it mostly still dealing with the trauma that existed?
Still dealing with the trauma. They know that there's going to be a reckoning. But as Rabbi Moskowitz said, visiting these brothers in arms who were front and center with regard to opposition to the judicial reform, they pivoted in a second on October 7th to become a central organization for donations and everything. They know what they'll be going back to, but not yet. Now it is dealing with people.
I would want to push back against what Philip is saying just a little bit, where I think that it's not that those thoughts have necessarily gone away. It's rather that a shared sense of purpose for the immediate task has come forward. And I think you could see that through a few ways. The first is going to Brothers in Arms, sort of one of the people that they were sure that we met with when we were there was a younger woman named Almog, who essentially was, has been, in the front of the protest movement for with her 10-month-old. And then, sort of since the war, kind of has been there with her child every day as her husband has then been called up for duty, that her arm was still full of the many different bracelets, that were talking about the social issues. So it's not the case that it was this new sense of purpose meant that she took them off. It means that she's not marching in the streets. It means that there's a choice of stability over change at this moment. But in a lot of ways, those thoughts haven't gone away. That, so much of that jump to action was a recognition that the government wasn't there to do it. Yeah, no, exactly. And
oh, that's powerful. Thank you.
Very powerful. And I don't quite know what to make with this, but in the 10 minutes that we had before going to the party with the residents of Kiryat Shmona, our partner region, I tried to go to an Israeli bookstore just because it's important for me to try to read Israeli novels. And when I asked the shopkeeper of what she recommended me to read, along with the sort of kind of best-selling novel, she also recommended that I buy, and I don't know if it's because they're unable to sell it because the interest is less, or if it's because she thought it was important, was a pamphlet, that was asking, can democracy endure? And so, whether they're just trying to get those off the shelf because no one cares about it anymore, or if it's this sort of, realization that, that's a question that's still going to be alive. And even as the actions that entails will wait till after the war, that I think that's something that's still on the minds of so many Israelis. That of course the shared sense of purpose is coming to the front right now. But I don't think those questions have gone away.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I
Have any-
think it's a great question, Ezra, and any other colleagues, please. I don't want to step on anyone's toes. The refrain that kept going through my mind as you asked that question was never again, in a different context, right? We know that we know that trope, and I think that is very much part of the mindset of Israel right now. That they will be resilient, they will persevere, they will take this hit, so to speak, as painful and as devastating as it is. I can't even imagine. And now I don't have to imagine, because we've sat with some of those families, we've spoken with people that survived the attacks on the kibbutzim and at the music festival. But this can never be allowed to happen again, and that's part of what is driving this war. That is part of the concern that we don't talk about the North much, but that's why there are not 100,000 Israelis living in the North right now, is because they know that is looming over their heads, and that they can't live with the looming fear. And it's not fear of rockets. I was listening to Yossi Klein Halevi, who we got to meet with while we were there. It's not fear of rockets, it's fear of what Hamas just did on October 7th, that Hezbollah and others will do that again and see it as a template. And so there is a collective collectiveness about Israeli society, that whatever needs to be done defensively so that this can never happen again, that is also a unifying force very much in Israel today, and that is blocking out some of the divisions, and it's also, I think, driving why there cannot be those kinds of divisions in the after, because they just can't.
So I'm getting I want to kind of wrap up things with, because I'm watching the time, with this kind of final question, and then you can add to this question any final thoughts that any of you have. I'm seeing through kind of the questions that we're getting, and I feel it too. I think many of us feel a frustration with what's being disseminated through media and what is getting to our children and what our children are seeing through social media, and the sometimes the one-sidedness of it. And I don't know if there's necessarily an answer amongst this group to this, or if this trip was necessarily even a attempt to answer this, but what can we do to try to push back? What can we do to try to help more balance be seen on our television stations, in our news media, in our social media? What can we do? Because I think there's 289 participants, which would be a lot more. There's a lot more people on this. And I think there's a lot of frustration out there about, we're hearing this and we're feeling touched by this, but we're not seeing this when our kids are turning on social media and when we're watching the news necessarily.
I know I just spoke, but I'll just speak briefly, and then please to others, if I can, on behalf of ACART, the Anti-Semitism in Israel Community Response Team that we formed in this community, and I co-chair with Nico, and is part of a Federation and CJA and the Rav. We're working on exactly that question, Ezra, and originally part of this webinar was to roll out to our community a toolkit that we've been working on for the last month, with exactly those kinds of suggestions and even some marketing and communications tools to use. It's basically ready, but it needed more time than we could give to this call. So I would just put a plug in to say that next week or so, that is coming, and we need to mobilize the 300 households that are on this call and more to take the messaging and the tools that we are going to disseminate and to utilize them and to push them. We're not defenseless in that regard. It has certainly taken us time to get up to speed. This isn't what any of us do for our day jobs. but this community has been tremendously supportive, and our volunteers and our professionals in particular have pulled together to pull these resources together with some really wonderful professionals in the fielding of marketing communications to help us address that very question. So it's coming.
One thing I'll say that was interesting on the trip was a number of Israelis that we interacted with would ask us about anti-Semitism and how things are in Canada, and with a lot of love and concern, and also I think a lot of confusion about how is it possible that the world is not more sympathetic to what happened here, and in some ways that was it was comforting in a strange way to be in an environment where everyone just took that for granted, of like, we all know what happened, but it is a difference in terms of our own kind of experience since October 7th. And I think that being able to there's a lot of fighting that happens on social media, and that doesn't serve anyone. But the capacity that we have to share what did happen, and to share the individual experiences, like I said, these personal stories. And we actually met with a really beautiful group of artists who are doing a project to bring together the voices of women who are survivors of October 7th, and give little videos. They're about 5 minutes long, of testimony of what they experienced with this really beautiful sand art that kind of accompanies the story. And something like that, I feel like, in terms of the capacity of social media, of sharing, of helping the world see what we saw, it can be quite powerful.
I'd like to suggest something, Ezra. You mentioned something that's exceedingly important. Some people may know or not know, I have an interfaith group. We go into high schools, and one of the things that we say, and I say to students, we cannot keep up with the misinformation that you receive every day. We cannot keep up with the misinformation that you receive every day. We are shlichim now. We went, we've come back. I will say, use us. If groups want to form with families and young people, and you want to invite us into your homes to share, that's important. That the message for how many households here is great. It needs to expand beyond that. I know that the shuls will be talking about it, but you now have in the community individuals who were there, and one of our mission, as you have heard, is to bear witness, which we have done. And this isn't a one-shot deal tonight. You heard it, that's it. So I know that congregational rabbis have nothing more to do than this, but no, but use us and invite us into your homes or into your groups or whatever it is, and make sure, if you can, that your kids are there. And one final thing I want to say to the non-Jews as well who are watching, thank you. There isn't an individual on this webinar who is not filled with a tremendous sense of empathy, caring, and profound sadness for what is happening to the innocent individuals in Gaza. But we have come to understand, and this is my analogy, Hamas is a tumor, it's a cancer, and Israel is involved in chemotherapy. And it's very difficult when that tumor is hiding behind healthy organs. And we know that there will be a tremendous amount of pain at times as the chemotherapy does its work. But to say that Israel has to stop the chemotherapy, we know what will result. So this tumor needs to be defeated.
I see a question I want to just share. The question is, what more can we do? And I just want to share a thank you. We went with 21 bags. I want to share a thank you from just one of the units that received those bags, some of those bags, if it's possible, if you don't mind.
It's a big thank you from the 941 We want to all say thank you so much for your great contributions and all your wonderful gifts you guys gave us. We really appreciate it. Keep it coming. I'm Israel Kai.
It's a beautiful thing. Rabbi Tendler, you want to finish it
I
out
think
for us?
I would love to, but I know that Rabbi Gibbs also had something to say.
Oh, Rabbi Gibbs,
And
perfect.
so, and then I do have a quick what we can do.
Okay, Rabbi Gibbs, go, and then Rabbi Tendler.
Yeah, I think something very important to keep in mind is that first, social media is terrible. You know, all the meetings that we've had over the past 2 months, whether it's with Deborah Lyons or the ambassador of, I guess the ambassador, it's just that the very nature of social media is terrible. And I think one of the most important things is to sort of move away from that sort of communal conversation to making things as personal as possible. You know, whether it is trying to build those connections, and it's not, necessarily with us as the ones who are telling the stories of the people that we met, but trying to actually facilitate that actual connection across oceans. And then at the same time of being able to, say very clearly, in that sort of heightened anti-Semitic rhetoric that is just flying around the internet, of being able to say how that affects you specifically, not in terms of seeing it as the sort of, back and forth table tennis disagreement of, which is more suffering, which is deserved, what's, the right strategy or the wrong strategy, but rather speaking about the vulnerability of what it is to sort of, hear this language that doesn't seem to fully recognize, your right to exist, as part of a minority community. And being able to, I think, bring that forward of what it is to personally affect you, and to recognize that there's going to be a difference between those higher level kind of questions of what, is and is not the sort of right military strategy that, IDF generals are, going to make between, airstrikes versus ground invasions versus, smaller commando forces. But instead being able to, I think, specifically say how it's affecting you, and to be able to better express for what those needs are. Just because, I think a lot of those emotional needs, as well as the, needs of the people that we met with, is different from some of those questions. And I think what social media has done has collapsed that distinction in a way that has really made it impossible for us to let that natural sense of empathy kind of create, in some ways, those connections that will allow us to move forward in a much more productive way.
Thank you. I want to add that when we ask about the media representing our story, we should be writing our elected officials. And we dialogue a lot amongst ourselves on social media or in dialogue, but we're in a silo. And we really takes the time. It can be short, but write our elected officials. We're so blessed to have an RCMP and a VPD that support us wholeheartedly. Thank them too, but thank our elected officials, and let your opinions be known to the news that you follow, right? And I say that because what I hear over and over again is that our elected officials hear from the other side often more in greater depth and in much more mass than the Jewish community is doing across North America. And it's such a small thing that we think about. We want our voices to be heard, but they can't be heard if we don't actually take the time to let them be heard outside of our own communities and within our own intimate relationships. And they don't have to, they can be done with gratitude. It can be done with clarity. They can be concise. But I can't emphasize enough how much it means to actually reach out to our officials, to the media, for ourselves, and say, hey, I would really like to see more stories that are slanted in this way, or I would really prefer to this, or I thought that was irresponsible, whatever that is. Don't just complain to the people who are within our community. Let your voices be known to the people who are going to help make that difference to achieve the ends that you want to see.
Thank you, Rabbi Tendler. And always, as I'll close in saying this, we are so lucky to have these clergy in our community, these rebbeim, they're there. If you have ideas for your congregation to do more, or new challenges that might have arisen in your life regarding this. Let's, make it known. Let's work together as a community to embrace each other in this moment and help ourselves through. So I believe we will come out stronger than we've ever been. I will end with one anecdote. When I was in Israel, I went down to the Dead Sea, and in the Dead Sea is a hotel that houses much of Kibbutz Be'eri. They were moved kind of in one complete piece. Part of the $6 million that have already been sent to this community had built a school for children ages 3 to 6, actually 2 to 6. It right at the hotel in tents set up outside of the hotel. And I went and visited this school. Interestingly enough, one of the staff members that's working on this school is Gabe Bloomfield, who I want to thank for doing this, her cousin, who I had a chance to meet and bring a little care package from Gabe, which was wonderful. But, there I was seeing these children running around, smiling and laughing, some of them who don't have parents anymore. I walk into this tent with Hody Khan, who is there with us, a member of our board, a great leader from our community. And we sit in the small chairs on the ground, and I start looking around, and I start to realize that it looks very much like my son Lior's kindergarten classroom at VTT. And the care that they took to make this into a place that seemed very normal in a very abnormal time was so incredibly touching. And then something caught my eye. There was a wall, and on the wall were pictures of all the kids in the class, just like my son's class at VTT. And all those kids looked just like the kids in my son's class at VTT. And I pointed it out to them, and I said, "Oh, that's so wonderful that you did that." And they said, actually, we went back to Kibbutz Be'eri after the massacre, and we pulled those down off the walls and brought them with us and rehung them to give the children a sense of normality in a very abnormal time. It's the little things that we're touching right now with the work that we do day in and day out, in the work that we have done in sending countless millions of dollars. To me, all those millions of dollars boil down to the little things we do to make things normal in a deeply abnormal time. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being a part of that in making this possible for our community. And I want to thank our rabbis for setting such an incredible example for me and for each one of us in the way that they lead from the front, the way the IDF leads from the front, saying Acharai, after me. And I want to say that we are here to continue to answer questions in the days and the weeks to come as things are unpacked in our own brains. We are here to be a resource for you, and we want to hear the stories that you have of the experiences as more and more people go to Israel and are able to embrace those in pain firsthand. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we look forward to further conversations in the future.
Ezra, thank you for your moderating.
Well,
very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.